All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If the folks in person could take a seat, we'll get started here. Real close. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Mike King. I'm the project manager for the York Josephine Corridor Study. I'm here with Eileen Yazzie from Y2K, our consulting team, to talk through this project with you all. So before we get fully started, I do want to hand it over to our interpretation team to make a quick statement about Spanish speakers.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Francisco Picado. I'm from Language Access LLC. And as part of their efforts to reach out to the community, the City and County of Denver offers interpretation at its events. For those of you who haven't gotten a chance to use this feature before, if you look at the bottom right of your screen, you can click on the little globe of interpretation and select the language of your choice. Bienvenidos a todos. Como parte de los esfuerzos de la ciudad y el condado de Denver para alcanzar a la comunidad, ofrece interpretación para la mayoría de sus eventos. Para aquellos que no han tenido la oportunidad de aprovechar de este servicio, por favor vayan a su pantalla y seleccionen en la parte inferior derecha el globito de la interpretación y escojan el idioma de su preferencia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Perfect. All righty. Thank you, everybody. And for today's meeting, we have some key goals, pretty much our agenda that we'll be running through. First and foremost, though, I did want to start with a crash update. Since our last meeting, there was actually one additional fatal crash on this corridor. It occurred at York and 23rd. It was a motorcycle driver that struck a left-turning vehicle. And just always want to keep everyone in the loop. Always want to keep people remembering that going high speeds, making sure you're paying attention to the intersection, the signals. It's a small error can result in the worst tragic incident. So with that said, that is why we're here today. We have seen this corridor show up on our high injury network for the last few years, and we really want to try and figure out how to make it safer. So we'll be presenting three alternative analysis. We'll be presenting three alternatives for this corridor for long-term improvements. These will all be based off of input that you all gave over the last 4 to 5 months and some city data analysis as well. We'll be addressing questions for each of these analyses as we go. You'll see three different alternatives as we present. And at the end of each alternative, we will take a quick break, do a question and answer to just kind of understand what all the key differences are. And then while we're doing this, each alternative, we'll have a survey up for you all to fill out. It'll be in the chat online, and then it'll be available in person here, hard copy, and with some QR codes to scan. So you can kind of follow along and fill out your preferred alternative. And then lastly, we'll discuss some short-term improvements that can happen between 40th and 18th, and that is with our paving program next year. So for those that weren't here at our first public meeting, we broke this segment into this corridor into three segments. Segment A being the two-way couplet on the north side with York and Josephine separated north of 40th Ave. Segment B being the 4-lane arterial between 40th and 18th. And then segment C being similar with the one-way couplets on the south side with York and Josephine being one way in each direction. Once again, as you can see, where that short-term improvement will be able to happen here is in that segment B. So just high-level schedule, where we're at, where we're going. For those that weren't a part of our last public meeting, that occurred back in July. We did do a lot of community touch points between then and now as well. Went to a bunch of farmers markets, met you all kind of on the street, a lot of different flyering events as well, where we got to speak with a decent amount of you. So thank you all for who were there the first time around and who came because of the new flyering that we just did recently. Since that last meeting, we did our alternative analysis internally, and I'll talk through what that really means and how we got to those alternatives. And then going forward, we will have a third public meeting later on, probably end of Q1, Q2, 2024 to follow up on the final design here. All right, so I've said alternative analysis a lot. What that really means is taking a bunch of different information for a corridor and identifying what the best alternatives are. It truly is an alternative analysis. We're analyzing the alternatives that we can do on this corridor from what's currently existing on the roadway today. What information goes into that is previous planning efforts, existing conditions, the city goals and objectives, as well as your all's input, again, from those last few community touch points and public meetings. What we do from there is develop alternatives, 3 specifically that Eileen's going to go through in a couple minutes here. And we'll use this meeting to help identify which one we should move forward with as the long-term solution to making York and Josephine corridor safer. So project input, vision and goals. I'm going to just jump to the next slide here. Oh, can you all hear us online? Do I need to hold it even closer?
You're coming through loud and clear online.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Any luck? Okay. Can you put on captions too? If you put on captions, typically it'll show up even if the audio is not coming through for, yeah. All right. All right. So while we're working on those technical issues online, hopefully we'll get a caption up potentially. We will see. The overall goals for the city side of this project follow our Denver Moves Everyone goals. And for those that don't know what Denver Moves Everyone is, that is our long-term transportation plan for the city, looking out up to year 2050. So really looking at long-term goals. What we want to focus on specifically are the 5 goals here: mobility, safety, sustainability, community, and quality, with equity running through all 5 of those goals. For this corridor specifically, we've identified key sub-goals, and those are making sure that this corridor prioritizes multimodal options, meaning that no matter how you get around in the city or on this corridor, you can get there safely, comfortably, and conveniently. So that means if you're on a bike, walking, taking transit, driving, riding a scooter, we want you to be able to use this corridor to the best of your ability. For safety, safety on this corridor, absolute top priority. This corridor specifically is on the high injury network. And what that means is it is one of the streets in our city where we have the highest serious and fatal crash rates. High injury network makes up 5% of streets in our city, but represents 50% of our serious and fatal crashes. This corridor also should be environmentally resilient, meaning we will maintain or improve existing green space on this corridor, connect and support communities. We know there's some key barriers on this corridor at 40th and 17th and 18th. We'll look at ideas of how we can improve those. And then make sure that quality of transit infrastructure is up to par. So what we heard from you all over the last 4 or 5 months here are similar to those goals that we just talked about. Multimodal, again, uncomfortable mixing in travel modes, meaning that pedestrians interacting with drivers interacting with cyclists. It's a lot of uncomfortable mixing happening on this corridor currently. And then crossing the corridor as any roadway user, as a bike, pedestrian, driver in general. Safety, once again, talking about those speeds, high speeds are an issue on this corridor. We're looking at ways that we can reduce those speeds in the long run. And lastly, pedestrian crossing concerns. Once again, really heard that from a lot of you all. Crossing this corridor as a pedestrian near the park on the south side and all throughout the north side, north of is an issue. And then lastly, connecting and supporting our communities, ensuring all segments receive similar levels of investment and increasing that north-south connectivity. What we mean by all sections receiving equal investment doesn't always mean monetarily. That means that they're getting the right amount of attention at each location so that we're making this, again, that ideal corridor of the future on York and Josephine. So for transit and operations, we've heard that you all want to make sure we are planning for the increased density on the north side of this corridor from 35th to 40th. We do know there's a significant amount of new build going on and a higher amount of population density that will be going in there. So making sure that transit can support that is a key goal. Environmental resilience, air pollution, noise pollution, stormwater drainage concerns, linking green spaces, meaning so that we can get from 39th Ave Greenway to some of our regional parks, and then increasing tree coverage in segment A specifically. And then lastly, overall, just making sure that we're incorporating the feedback that you all have given us over the last few years on all of the other studies that have happened in this area. York has had a consistent situation where it has been the end of a bunch of different corridor studies, or sorry, area plans. And that means that when it's on the border like that, it usually just says future study is needed. So this is that future study that we've been talking about for the past few years. And then lastly, putting that all together is the corridor vision. So this is what we wanted to want to be able to say about this corridor when this project is completed. York Josephine is a corridor for safe, accessible, multimodal mobility for all users that is removed from the high injury network, that is environmentally resilient and serves to connect communities. So I'm going to hand it off to Eileen here, and we'll talk through the alternatives.
Thank you, Mike. And again, thank you everyone that joined us in person, and thank you for joining us online. As Mike mentioned, we are looking for feedback, particularly for preference. We're not saying, hey, don't speak up, don't ask questions online or in person, but we really want to have this cohesive understanding from the community. So we are asking everyone to fill out a survey as we start going through this. People online, for the people in the room, there's I believe a web link at the top of the tables. For people online, what's this? While everyone has pulled out their phones, yes, you can use them. If you want to use the hard copy, it may be easier to read the pictures. For those online at home or online on your phone, if you scan it again, the pictures related to the corridor may seem small, and the best way to view it is on a laptop or an iPad. Thank you for that. So hopping right in, I'm going to start on the corridor alternatives. And I will note this is after this meeting, this information will be posted. We recognize it's going to be a lot. Can you go to the next slide? So kind of starting off is we wanted to focus and kind of ground us in understanding we are presenting 3 alternatives. As Mike mentioned, there are a total actually of 5 different roads. In the north, we have those 2-way streets, York and Josephine. In the middle, we have York. The bottom, we also have York and Josephine. Yet we want to have a cohesive vision for the future of this corridor. So we're going to go through, so you can go to the next slide, please. The first one is reconfiguring the corridor. This will, as you'll see in a couple of slides, it will increase the pedestrian amenity zone. Alternative number 2 is providing dedicated space for transit. You will see how that works again in each individual road, but we are looking to add in dedicated transit lanes throughout the corridor. Again, that consistent vision. And then the third alternative is dedicated space for people biking. Again, you'll see in each one of those different roads, if you're in the north, middle, or south, what that looks like. It's also recognized there is an asterisk and there are words on the slide. I think it's important, one thing, while we can determine the vision of this corridor, it will need to be confirmed in another planning study. Right now, there's Denver Moves bike plan that's being updated. There's also a community transportation network that's going to be launched in this area, and that recognizes the connectivity and trying to best understand where bikes fit into the community when it comes to the network. So they will zoom out more than this quarter. This quarter is obviously focusing on that. So this recommendation, if this is the vision that does move forward, it will be included in that effort for consideration. So keep going on. Next slide. One thing we wanted to talk through as well is understanding that we've worked to set goals for this corridor, and we wanted to evaluate and look at high level, do these alternatives meet the goals, or how best do they connect to the goals that have been established? For alternative one, this is reconfiguring the corridor. When it comes to mobility and quality, it kind of is a neutral connection. And when it comes to the others, safety, sustainability, community, and equity, it does impact it in a positive way. For alternative two, dedicating space to transit, it has a neutral impact, possibly maybe a negative one that I'm now thinking about this out loud. Neutral impact for mobility, as well as safety. Sustainability, it is noted that it's neutral, but it does can have a negative effect. In order to meet this alternative, we will have to cut into or remove the pedestrian amenity zone right now that's landscaped and greenscaped. We would have to cut into that. It does, though, again, address the barriers by providing transit improvements throughout the entire corridor, and has a positive on quality and equity. For alternative three, it has a neutral zone. It has a neutral impact for sustainability and quality. It is noted if we dedicate room for bicyclists, we will have to cut into the pedestrian amenity zone, the landscape, and the tree zone, just like alternative two. So transit, dedicating space to transit and bikes, particularly in the middle section, that's where we would have to cut the curb or move it back out, and then it would negatively impact the current landscaping and trees. And actually, can you go back really quick? And one thing I do want to highlight, though, it does have a positive impact when it comes to mobility and really that inclusivity of addressing all people on this corridor. Safety as well. A lot of this will use the alternatives as reconfiguring the streets. So it will have that positive impact on safety as well as community and equity. So the segment details. So we're going to take now, again, considering how big this corridor is, we're going to look at the north section of both York and Josephine and go through each alternative so we can have a collective understanding of what could happen there. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Pause for questions. Oh. We forgot that slide. Travis is going to bring the mic around just so we can be inclusive with the people online.
Hi, how are you? I live on York and segment B, and it's just tremendously concerned about destroying the easement, and you're taking out so many mature trees that are irreplaceable. I just feel that it goes against all your mission statements at the beginning with respects to segment B. And it's like, as much as I want a bike lane or more public transport access, you would really irreparably change the nature of the neighborhood by doing that. So I don't see it's incongruous to your initial statements of what you want to achieve.
Thank you. And we'll address that more once we start going through about those impacts.
Is it too early to ask how long each of these initiatives or each of these alternatives would take to complete?
That's a great question. So there's two different parts to this. There's going to be that short term that we're talking about on segment B that's going to happen with paving next year. But the long term is dependent on a factor of things. One, and always the top priority is the funding. We're writing this in a way to get this final report written in a way where we can apply directly for federal grant dollars to make this happen on a much faster pace. That said, we are competing with everyone else in the country when we do that. If we're doing it with the local dollars, then we're competing with all the projects that also happen at Dottie. So ideally, I guess there's not a perfect answer to that, but it's all dependent on what funding source we receive to then move forward. So the question was, why wasn't a raised median with trees considered, which I think is a great question to ask. It all is dependent on traffic volumes. So if we go down from currently what's listed, especially, I'm assuming that's in segment B, where that question was referring to. We have 4 lanes in each direction right now. If we drop to 1 lane in each direction with that solid median, it would most likely not be able to have or hold the capacity of the average daily travelers that we currently have on the street. Yeah. So yeah, we'll keep going to actually show visuals of the alternatives now and then jump to questions.
You're good. All right, so we're gonna head into segment A. So this is just a snapshot to ground us and remind us what part of this quarter we're talking about. This is segment A, York, Josephine. Currently, they each are 1 way in each direction. York is southbound, Josephine is northbound. And we can kind of start hopping in. So alternative 1 is considering reconfiguring the corridor. And I will note, again, related to what Mike mentioned about how we develop these alternatives, previous recommendation from another planning study said, let's convert these to 2-way streets, as well as the public, lots of public input related to this and saying, let's convert them, let's stop the 1-way. The idea then is that York, we would use 1 lane in each direction, center turn lane. Josephine, it would be 2 lanes in each direction with safety and or parking on street. Right now, again, they have parking on street on the east side. This would offer parking on both sides and really looking to downgrade it if it makes sense, or say, great, right now it's carrying a bunch of freight, a bunch of trucks. We want them actually to stay to York. That's the idea with this, is all of the freight movements and the commercial vehicles that are associated with the industrial area, they will stay on York. I'll kind of, the next slide will, the next piece of information will do this. And then Josephine can turn into that neighborhood place, very similar to the collector, the neighborhood quarter, what is it? Columbine is just the next street on the east side of it. So really kind of trying to change the character of that and make it more into the neighborhood street. If you go to the next slide. This came up, we did have a stakeholder, we met with our stakeholders on the corridor as well, and they said, how would this happen? How would the turning movements, how would vehicles move? How would this work? So this is an idea of how the transition can happen. So again, we're really looking to have the vehicle movements from that through coming from whether it's south or north, we'll say from 40th, is stay on York. And if they need to go to Josephine, that's the whole point of this. If they need to go over there, then they're going to make a hard right turn and a hard left to head north or south. And that's the way the neighborhood. So the idea, again, is all of the freight movements and the main traffic looking to get to or from I-70 or to continue going north. There's no reason to go onto Josephine. They're just going to stay on that York Street. So that's really going to continue to be that arterial collector, providing, I would say, more of that prioritized, that area and space for those movements. There's a couple green arrows we have here, and those are acknowledging that we need to keep people walking and biking connected. So let's use the previous street or create new spaces and reprioritize what Denver owns and make that a priority for people walking and biking so that connectivity continues. Next slide. Alternative 2 is prioritizing transit. This would keep the 1-way streets, and we would flush kind of again with the transit being with the pickup and drop-offs related to the doors on the bus actually. So we need to keep them kind of again on one side of the street for each direction. You can go to the next slide. And for dedicated space for biking, for people biking. Since first off, for this alternative, we would reconfigure the corridor. So we would, again, make this into 2-way streets. And then we would prioritize or move people that are biking as a neighborhood bikeway on the neighborhood street on Josephine. So that would be that would be where people that would be the goal, is where people would bike, is on Josephine. All right, next slide. So this is the time, and so this is kind of how the next, I would say 10, 15 minutes are going to go. We're going to go through each kind of area of the corridor study, go through the alternatives, and then take time together, both online and in person, to clarify and ask questions about these alternatives. So on that, Mike, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just want to double down on what Eileen just said there, that this time open for questions is really to get clarification on each segment, or sorry, each alternative. And then when you have a preference, that would go into the survey or on the hard document here in person. So we'll open it up for questions. I'm going to go real quick. So first question was from the chat, and it's a very good question for the folks that live on York in this area that want freight removed from their corridor as well. On segment A, there we go. That is a really good question, and I'm glad that that was asked, because we need to look into how best we navigate that. Unfortunately, with the land use that's up there, most of the freight is entering and exiting off of the existing industrial properties. So it's difficult to get it off of there, but I think it's a conversation worth having. We need to do a little more research on how we could potentially mitigate that even more.
With alternative number 2 on the Josephine side, would that basically act like number 1 to kind of make it not as great for the freight to go down Josephine?
Yes, so that would kind of, because it's still one way. It still would require freight to go on Josephine, because if it remains one way, all freight going that direction would have to still use Josephine. For alternative A, that's where it allows, sorry, I keep saying the wrong letters and numbers. Alternative 1, making it two-way really makes it unnecessary for freight to ever enter Josephine.
To follow up with number 1, kind of based on that freight going through neighborhoods, I find that a lot go down 43rd and 44th, and on that two-way Josephine option for number 1, that would, I don't know if it would have the impact you think it would, potentially, just because they do still have that option to turn left to get to that shipping port from our neighborhoods.
And I appreciate that you brought up 44th and 43rd too, because when I was flying a couple weeks ago, I noticed that there is a significant freight traffic that uses that corridor as well. Yeah, east to west. Our plan is to reach out to those freight yards and understand that if we two-way York, would that alleviate 43rd and 44th? Sorry, I keep going the wrong way.
Hey, thanks for having this session. Can you explain a bit more what the yellow and red hashed lanes are? I don't understand that compared with the legend.
Yes, absolutely. The yellow, so you're talking, well, I don't need the point because people are online. Yellow and orange hash on here is at intersections is where you typically see potentially a bulb out or something installed that narrows the roadway width. But then outside of those intersection spots would be on-street parking. So utilizing that space for parking. So what's currently out there existing, I think that there is parking on each side of the road currently. It would just be maintaining that and then having it be bi-directional depending on which alternative it is.
Emily had a comment which was asking whether there's enforcement of the current weight limit along York for 7,000 dry.
That is a good question, and I will reach out to DPD on that because that's typically out of Dottie's purview, unfortunately. I do want to jump back one more time to the hashed orange and yellow. Did that make sense to everybody? So that, because we're going to see that a few more times on our slides going forward. Cool. Any other questions in person for segment A?
Yes. The question is, hello, the trucks right now are not only in Josephine, but also in York. And this is a real problem, not just for people that walk or transit along those streets, but also for the families that live there, especially for children.
One of the things that we'll be presenting after we go through each segment, the recommendations include focusing in on providing additional trees, filling in the gaps, and additional landscaping, particularly in the north segment, in this segment A. Again, we're looking in kind of that overall recommendation that we are greening the corridor and providing more trees. So, and it is recognized in segment A, there, particularly on York, it is lacking almost completely, and as well as specifically noted, it's lacking in front of the residential properties on York. So there's an overall recommendation that we will get to that does provide, let's add additional trees and landscaping to the corridor. And I bring that up, while that does not solve the problem or the congestion of the freight and trucks on York, it provides some type of mitigation, a small piece of it. We know it's just a piece of the puzzle, but we'll continue to look at solutions. Did that answer Maria's question?
Bueno, bueno, mi voz está un poquito mal, por eso preferí escribir, pero me gustaría mejor hablar en mi propia voz. Yo creo que
My voice
Sí.
is pretty rough right now. That's why I chose to write it down. But I would like to speak. I prefer to speak.
Bueno, creo que la más grande preocupación de las personas que viven ahí por la Josephine y de la Josephine a la, viene siendo como 43 a 42 a 46. Una de las preocupaciones que han mencionado a nosotros, perdón por no presentarme, mi nombre es María de Luna y trabajo con la coalición de GS. Entonces, transito mucho por esa área y una de las cosas que nos han comentado es el tráfico que hay de los trailers, porque allá hay mucha bodega o mucho camión grande, tanto como de la Coca-Cola, como hay demasiado, de varios.
The main
Entonces,
thing that worry us, that we're worried about on Josephine, it's and by the way, my name is Maria Luna and I am from GES, the GES Coalition. And it's that if you look at it from 42nd all the way to 46, what worries us is all that freight, all the traffic of heavy trucks that is ever present. Proceda, María.
y no solamente que transiten por ahí, sino que es peligroso porque hay varias familias que viven y hay niños. Entonces, por lo regular, no pueden usar la Josephine. tratan de usar más el callejón, pero es un problema. Entonces, la preocupación es de ellos, de tanto transporte. ¿Qué pasaría si hacen todos estos cambios? ¿Han mirado qué solución darían para cuidar no solamente el tránsito, sino a las personas que viven en esa área?
So the problem is that traffic is dangerous. This is particularly true for the families and the children. So these folks are not able to use Josephine. They end up using the alley next to it, but that's not a solution. So what do you plan to do long-term to solve this problem for the families?
Thank you, Maria, for that question. That is, thank you for clarifying that too. I misheard. I thought you meant you were living on York. So it sounds like you're living on Josephine. And the plan for alternatives 1 and 3 will result in
Sí,
freight being
bueno,
moved.
son
Freight-
las dos calles en la misma tránsito, en la York y en la Josephine.
Both streets have the same problem. We have the same traffic on both streets.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So currently what we're looking at is if we did alternatives 1 or 3, the freight traffic would be fully alleviated from Josephine. And the slide that's currently up is really showing why that's the case. As you can see, if we remove the extension of Josephine that connects to the intersection at 40th Ave, between 40th Ave and 41st Ave, it will make it so that it's not as appealing or even needed for a freight traffic to go onto Josephine, really kind of recreating the grid that's already existing up there with the parallel streets just east of Josephine as well. That said, for York, that is where we would have that issue with freight maintained on that corridor because it is the through collector street at that point. That is something that we have to look more into and figure out what our best alternatives are. In this case, that may be the best alternative, unfortunately, based off of the land use in this area. I hate to have that be the answer, but as of right now, it's tough to say we could move that freight fully off of York because of the existing land use.
And if I could add, so if for the freight, for the trucks that are accessing off of York, so in the future, if we have this option implemented where there are, again, two-way streets, so the freight that pulls out or going into in or out of York on the left-hand side, the west side of the street, they're going to stay on York. They're just going to make an immediate left to stay on York to go north. So right now they're driving through one of the avenues, 41st. You can't drive 42nd, 41st, 43rd, 44th, 45th to access the freeway and or to continue to travel in the area. This option, alternative 1, alternative 3, provides that north movement right on York. Those trucks will immediately make a left, head north on York, or immediately head south. That is the idea, is to keep the freight on one area and one on York versus, and so that really, since there's direct access to I-70 off of York, again, that north-south movement, that can happen. They wouldn't need to travel to Josephine.
Ok,
All right.
ahorita como estamos, los camiones que más problema dan son los que vienen del sur hacia el norte.
Right now, the way things
Es
stand,
verdad lo que está diciendo, si cambian las alternativas, van a moverse completamente estos camiones que están agarrando estas calles, porque realmente en el vecindario no solamente es por esas dos calles donde transitan los camiones grandes, en toda el área, y realmente es un problema Porque si
Right now, most of the truck traffic is coming from the south. But the thing is that this will remain a problem because it's just the volume of the traffic and the freight. And they will continue to use the other streets to go through the area.
Thank you, Maria. We definitely understand that as well. We are going to move to the next segment, but I would like to do a one-on-one with you. If you wouldn't mind reaching out to Nola or Cat Hill, we will get your contact info and we can have a one-on-one chat as well so that we can get more details.
claro que sí, claro que sí. Y podemos tener a lo mejor algunas de las personas que viven en el área para que puedan expresar mejor sus preocupaciones ellas.
Yes, of course. I would love that. Maybe we can have some of the folks that live in that area too, so they can also express their concerns and have one meeting.
Yes, and thank you. We are
Gracias.
Gracias. We are going to move forward. Again, as we just presented the northern segment, we're going to move to the middle. We're going to go through alternatives 1, 2, and 3. To remind us of what the existing conditions are, we have 2 lanes in each direction. There are a lot of restricted lefts. There is no turn lane. There is no parking, no right turn lanes either. And we can start diving into alternatives. Alternative 1, and these are stacked together. So this is reconfiguring the roadway. This is removing a lane in the long term. So we would be able to have 1 travel lane in each direction and then have a center turn lane. This, we could also, in the long-term vision, we could move in and or extend the pedestrian realm. So possibly widen the sidewalk or just move the curb out further into the street to create more of a area for landscaping and tree planting. Alternative 2, transit is the, again, dedicated space for transit. So this would be, we would reconfigure the roadway to 3 lanes in each, to 1 lane in each direction, center turn lane. We would widen out, so it would move into the existing area where there is landscaping, grass, and trees. This would provide dedicated space for transit. The third option is dedicated space for people biking. And I will note, we have looked at the street, been out there measuring up and down and just hoping that some miraculous way that we could walk onto the street and the curbs will move. They will not. We are limited space. We can't fit in 3 travel lanes and bike lanes. So if we want to have dedicated space for people biking, we would like alternative 2 cut into the existing grass, pedestrian zone, and trees. So it would affect that if we provided space for people biking. Next slide. And this, we're already jumping into questions, comments, discussion about this, again, segment B, and we heard initially in the beginning about the concern about the current grass and trees.
Sorry that I jumped the gun. Yeah. So I think one of the things that obviously I said that it would be a big change, and it's admirable that you're trying to add more tree cover to segment A, but it wouldn't in any way be able to compensate for the overall loss of canopy. You're talking about adding immature trees to 6 blocks and losing 20 blocks worth of very mature old trees. So you would fail to meet an environmental bonus with those. The other thing that I would say is that I've physically had people crash into my easement, and the only thing that stopped them from going into my house was the presence of a easement with a bit of a rockery. So I've had that happen to me. Paradoxically, people have planted trees on that segment to prevent people from crashing into their houses. A bike lane or an empty bus lane wouldn't necessarily protect them from that. So you would be making those residents less safe. I mean, that's just the reality. Where I live on 29th and York, my neighbors had his fence crashed into we rely on physical barriers because there's no guarantee that after these improvements, people won't still be driving around York at 90 miles an hour at night. So you got to bear that. And the other thing is that none of the other residents of segment A or C will actually see real impact to where they live. It's only segment B people. So I think you need a wider audience of specifically people that live there before you make such a big decision.
Thank you for that input.
That was really well put. I just want to second everything that you said. I totally agree and have had similar experiences. Thank you for saying that.
So I live on 24th in York, and I certainly agree with everything you said. The speeding, particularly after the rush hour commute, say after 7 o'clock, when the traffic patterns slow down a little bit, people will go 40, 50, 60 miles an hour down it. So I think something that really needs to be addressed in sort of the north-south traffic flows, also the ability to cross the street. So I'm directly across from the golf course, but a lot of people jog, bike. There's a really nice bike lane already that fronts the golf course and City Park itself. So that's a 7-block stretch where I think adding bike lanes would be completely redundant. If it comes at the expense of reducing Parkway 2, to your point, I think would be kind of a missed opportunity there. But what I think needs to be really addressed in this plan is not just north-south traffic, but it needs to be the number of children that go to jazz in the park, the number of people that want to use those bike paths that already exist in City Park, some sort of ability that's safe to cross the street for families. Because there's a lot of families, myself included, my kids are getting older, but kids that are 4 or 5 years old that are just starting to learn how to ride bikes. So that could be addressed through speed humps, more zebra striping, perhaps electrified flashing lights, something that really allows traffic to slow down. I do think the option of reducing a lane and not adding bus lanes that would widely be unused or unfilled most of the time is going to help slow traffic. But the idea of reducing, I think, does make sense.
So we'll go to the folks online now. I'm going to read out one of the questions and then Jared, will go to you. You have your hand raised. Jill, we see your question about alternative 1. Would the tree lawn and pedestrian zone be widened in that alternative?
Yes, that would be the exact plan. It would be where there is existing pavement that would be narrowed further to pretty much narrow the entire right of way down to that 3-lane width. In regards to the pedestrian space, once again, when you have to do construction and widen even the sidewalk, it would require removal or potential removal. I don't want to say 100% removal of vegetation and legacy trees. Yep. And just a reminder for those that are online and that have arrived in person, we do have the surveys around, and this is where we want to make sure that we're getting your all's feedback. Survey, right now we're just doing clarifying questions and comments. And then when it actually comes to which alternative you want to see, please put that in the survey. And it's also in the chat again. Let's go to Jared and then we'll go back to folks in person.
I just want to reiterate that what everyone else said earlier, I agree with. Option number 1 is really the only viable option that we're currently being presented with, especially if the York Street residents are maybe gaining a little bit of what's it called, the yard lawn or tree lawn area. But I think the real key needs to be removing those folks who should not be taking York Street as their primary superhighway and funneling them to maybe Colorado or Downing or somewhere else where they can actually support that amount of traffic. Like Downing has parking on both sides, or at least one side, up and down. And I know this isn't a part of our purview, but we need to be thinking about getting people off of York Street for cars in general.
Absolutely. Thank you for that input.
And maybe option 1 is the only choice for that, because you will be shortening the road width overall, which should in general make it a little safer to cross, because you're not going across 4 lanes now. You should only be going across 3, and the center one should only be for turning. So that should help a little bit. But we're just stuck here in an impasse with our 3 options.
And one thing to mention on both of those as well, or all of these comments so far, we're showing this as a 2-way left turn lane. Not every intersection has a left turn that's needed also. So if you think about along the park, like you had said, that gives us an opportunity for any of these 3 options to put in pedestrian refuge islands. Thank you. This is what the typical mid-block or intersection would look like, but that center running space would be potentially painted median, potentially pedestrian refuge island. So I do want to be clear, we're not just going to have, similar to what you're saying with the potential empty transit lane, this won't be an empty lane down the middle of the road the entire stretch. We will repurpose that when it is applicable.
Thank you for the clarification. That helps.
So for option 2, what is the impact positive of like travel times for buses in that corridor? I don't know, like how much does, with 24 being such a long route, is that a major part of delays in the corridor?
That's a good question. And currently the bus is running at 1 hour headways. That is the long-term goal is to be 15-minute headways. That would allow, having bus lanes specifically would allow for those headways to be realistic. Right now, they're unrealistic with the amount of traffic and lane space. So in the Denver Moves transit plan, that has identified this corridor as a potential priority transit corridor as well. So I should say right now, if we just put this in, we wouldn't see that much of a change, but in the long term, increasing transit route, transit frequency, then we would see the benefit.
Yeah, I guess 2 questions now. The first one has to do with speed reduction. Currently 4 lanes, 2 going each way. This would be 1 lane going each way with in a middle lane. As like a transit planner rule of thumb, does switching from 2 lanes going both ways to 1 leave speeds the same, increase them, or decrease them?
Good question. And decrease for sure. Increased congestion decreases speeds.
Great. And then I guess the second question, for the middle lane, when it's not a turn lane, what are the odds of that middle spacing being turned into not only pedestrian shelter spaces, but also greenway space where you could put lawn and new trees and actually increase the canopy along? Not obviously as wide as what we have on something like 7th Avenue, but is that feasible with all 3 of these options?
Yes, yeah, concrete median, well, I say concrete, so hardened median, which could include grass, tree lawn, et cetera, is definitely feasible with all of these options outside of the intersection space. So we're going to jump to the next, one more, and then we're going to talk about short term in this segment as well, real quick.
I'll make it very brief and I'll add it to the survey. I did notice this section relative to section 8 and C. It's the only section that has no sort of thought put into potentially street parking as a way to mitigate speeds. And I wonder why was that intentional, or I guess why would this section be missed when the other 2 sections included that option?
I'm only smiling because I know what's coming on the next slide for short term, but all right.
I want to push together. So the reason why parking is not included in segment B as part of alternative 1, 2, or 3. So going back up to segment A, the north 40th to 47th, and then south even to segment C that you'll see the southern end from about 17th down to Colfax, they have existing parking. They also have front-facing residential, not with alleys. So the idea again, and I think that goes back with the differences of the alternatives, is responding to those distinct needs. Segment A again is can we make Josephine more of a neighborhood corridor? Can we leave the on-street parking to support the residents in place? Segment B, from what we heard from public input, parking on-street in this segment was not a high priority. That is one of the reasons why we did not and put this in alternatives. We can, again, if this is a request to look to see if one of these can support on-street parking, we could look at it. Other thing too is that if on-street parking is put into one of these alternatives, even alternatives 1, again, it would either, like alternative 2, eat into the right of way if we wanted on-street parking on both sides, or it would be on one side. And again, from a long-term vision, if we're trying to provide space for all users, is on-street parking the best option for the long-term vision? If it is, please add in those comments. Those are helpful.
And sorry, one last thing to add on this, and then we're going to jump to the short term in this segment. We are showing that there's no bike facility in alternatives 1 and 2. We have the luxury of this being a part of the grid system of Denver, and we have the option to do a neighborhood bikeway long-term parallel to the corridor as well. I don't want that to go unheard. That it doesn't mean that if we don't go a segment or alternative 3, means that bikes just don't exist here. There are other options that can still happen. So I just want to make that clear as well. So we're going to jump to the short term. I know we still potentially have a few more questions on that, so happy to stick around afterwards to chat through some more. So with this being segment B, once again, this is being paved next year. With paving allows us to have an opportunity to do some restriping. What that means is, well, 2 things. 1, as you can see, the reason why we focused on 4-to-3 conversion on all 3 of those long-term options is that in the short term, with the current travel demand that we have right now, we could change this corridor to a 3-lane corridor as of next year with paving. A couple reasons why. 1, again, with the quick build using paving, but then also the pros and cons of a span wire signal. Those are the very outdated signals that are on your all's corridor that eventually we plan to upgrade. Because they exist, we are capable of doing this change. Usually when we have the full signal head signals, we have to make sure that the mast arms will support additional signals to make this function. Being a outdated signal head actually allows us to make this change. So kind of the one good thing that's remaining that's good about span wire signals. But what that looks like is very similar to what Eileen was describing with the 3-lane sections. 1 way in each direction with the 2-way left turn lane. What that also means, though, is that because it's with repaving, we're not going to be tearing up any asphalt. This is only fully using whatever right of way we have available, which is about 40 feet wide. Because of that, we have the opportunity to add that flex space, similar to what we talked about for Josephine in segment A, but in a paint and post treatment. So if you want to jump to the next slide, we can actually show what that kind of amenity zone would look like. So we have traffic safety improvements. These are painted bump outs. And again, this is all paint and post. This isn't concrete, unfortunately, because we're doing this with paving. We don't have the opportunity to jump in with concrete right away. But again, paint and post bulb outs, again, primarily along the park area, but then also as needed farther north. Median pedestrian refuge islands, as we described previously. Again, these would be paint and post though. And then transit priority at intersections. We would maintain the in-lane bus stops so that it wouldn't affect our headways for the transit in one direction. And then in the return direction, if possible, we're still confirming lane widths on this, but trying to figure out if there's an opportunity for that bus bypass lane where vehicles can make a right, but then the bus can go through the intersection, similar to what you'll see at Lincoln and 13th, or a few of the existing transit lanes that we have in the city. And then 2 other pieces to this too. We could, depending on where it is on the corridor, potentially continuing to restrict left turns or open up left turns to more options, especially at those signalized intersections. And then lastly, with the space remaining with we would actually install on-street parking on one side of the corridor. This isn't, there's nothing to do in the survey on this one. We'll open it up to conversation and question for a couple minutes because I know that this is a big change, but we see this being very, very possible to do next year. And typically this would take 2 to 3 years, but because we have that opportunity for this whole stretch getting paved, we can really start moving on it now if there is support for this.
In the past, we've heard from Dottie that level of service is no longer going to be the main driver of decisions. And I'm curious why there isn't a fourth option here to show that, I mean, we have the right of way there that doesn't raise the specter of tree removal or cutting into easements. And it's that center turn lane space. You have the space to do it. But I mean, I think it would be important to explain to people that the reason why that's not there is that we're still prioritizing vehicle movement. So I personally think there should be a fourth option that's still there that says, hey, we can put in a bike lane or things and we don't have to cut your tree down. Because that's a bit of a boogeyman that I think is coming up right now.
So that's more related to that long term. So this is, this is all short term just to keep the conversation separated. But that's a good point. But I do want to point out that the reason why we can do this right now is I understand level of service is not the top priority. There is still realistic need for level of service going from 2 lanes or from 4 lanes in each direction down to 2 lanes in each direction. For the riders, for the drivers, the people that live on this corridor, they can answer the question that what happens when someone turns left on York right now? That left lane turns into a complete standstill and usually results in rear end crashes. What that would then in turn into is maintaining that same issue, but then narrowing it down to 1 lane. So as much as I support and would like you to put that into the survey as well, there is the option to say none of the above and add that detail as well. That's why it wasn't included in this option.
I think the really nice thing about this proposal is that it provides an improvement, but then it avoids lengthy engineering works in the future. And I think you need to think about the impact on the quality of life of people living directly in front of the construction, which that would be me and a couple of other fellas here. And if the feedback is this is working, this is great for segment B, just leave it alone, right? And it causes the least disruption and you get the immediate value.
Absolutely. Yeah. If that's feedback that we receive, then that gives us more priority to look at segments A and C as well.
Jill has a question online. She says, is there enough demand for parking to fill that parking in the short-term design? And could it also be used for parklets, perhaps intermittently?
Great question. It depends on where you are on the corridor. When you're along the park, we are confident that there will be parking demands. And especially, I don't have any inside information here on parks. I just know that we talk about it they talk about it publicly, that eventually those roads will be closed inside City Park as a long-term solution. This will be an opportunity to have additional parking for things like City Park Jazz and all of the major events that happen at City Park. Farther up on the corridor, and actually even on that stretch, we are not sold on every location being parking. We want to keep that as a flex space, as an amenity zone to do things like that as well.
No, we're good. We are going to move forward to talk through the alternatives of the last segment. So the one that's further south between 18th and Colfax. And these will look familiar. So current existing conditions, you are very similar to the north. You have each two one-way streets, or again, York is heading south, Josephine is heading north. And we also, before we move forward into showing the alternatives, we do want to note, we recognize Colfax Avenue will have a brand new upgraded bus rapid transit project installed sometime in the next years. I won't say year or years and put a date on it. We'll leave that project over there in a positive way. It's moving. That's great. We recognize that there will be impacts in a positive way to the way people move through, to, and across the corridor. With these alternatives, if they move forward or one moves forward, we will have to do, Denver will move forward with additional study because we are recommending again to look for two-way, changing and reconfiguring the roadways, improving transit, providing dedicated space for bicyclists like we are in the other segments. So this would need further study, most likely after the Colfax Avenue Bus Rapid Transit Project is open, just to understand how that movement and people's behaviors have changed. So moving forward, alternative one, very similar to the north segment, is that we would reconfigure the streets, and so they would be two-way in each direction. Also recognizing as well for York in this alternative, parking is not a guarantee. It could be, again, one lane in each direction with a center turn lane. There's an option for that. So I don't want people to think that the safety improvements in parking are yes. It could be, again, that center turn lane. As well, there's room for Josephine to have the one way in each direction, center turn lane, and possible either safety improvements or on-street parking that currently has it. Alternative two is looking at prioritizing transit. This keeps the one-way street, very similar to what we saw in the northern section. Alternative three, this provides dedicated space for people biking. Similar, like the north segment, this would use Josephine as prioritizing people for biking. So it would not say, okay, go ahead and split the street, again, looking for that kind of safe connection. So if we think of that, we have, again, that dedicated space just on Josephine for people biking. And then the next slide shows kind of, again, all the three alternatives, and want to take questions or discussion about these.
I need to be a quick wet blanket on this one before we go further, because I forgot to have you mention this. This is one of those situations where a study would have to lead to a study. I hate to say that. It's the absolute worst thing for people to say. Oh, you did say that. Okay, sorry, I clearly wasn't listening. I will reiterate this. The study will lead to a study, not just because of Colfax BRT, but because this would potentially be the opportunity to look at this from 18th down to First. There's a full stretch. Even if Colfax BRT went in tomorrow, we can't have Josephine be two-way, go into the one-way at crossing one of the major arterials in our city. There are a lot of more things that have to happen there. What this will do is gear, whenever that next study becomes a priority, what we start focusing on first. So that's kind of what I want to clarify here. Think of this as whatever happens here would then get extended further south if we started that next study. Now we'll open up for questions.
So which one of these options, I'm thinking specifically for East High School, whenever you're going south, when you get to that turn, the left turn lane, it is always backed up because there's not enough space between York and Josephine to have enough cars to get the flow through. So you would have high school backed up all the way up York, almost all the way to 17th sometimes. Maybe through 17th.
You guys are killing me today. These are great questions. These are fantastic questions. Sorry, I shouldn't say it that way. I appreciate, this is why we have these conversations, because you all know the corridor more than anybody in this on this team. Honestly, we have a few people that live on the corridor, but you all are there every single day. That is a great question. That would be kind of getting more into detail of once we would start to design that long term, is understanding where that volume really can't lose that lane. So similar to what we would do on that short term when we're looking, if you're driving southbound on York and that very heavy movement on 18th, that right turn movement southbound on York, potentially if we do that short term improvement, that may have to stay right now because of the amount of volume that happens there without affecting the backup significantly. So I don't have the perfect answer for you right now because that's more of a spot specific treatment. So as the design would start moving, that's when we would look at that type of information.
Here you go.
Would you have an idea which one of those alternatives, I guess, would be best to think about? Because if you have the two-way options, that would just cause a standstill completely in the lane rather than even continuing flow. I mean, honestly, any of those options, if there's just a dedicated bus lane.
And I think that gets back into what that orange and yellow amenity zone would be. Again, there would be times when potentially you would have to maintain as a through lane depending on traffic volumes. I know we don't want to say level of service is the top priority, but in cases when it's accessing schools and major destinations, there are times when it's needed. But yeah.
Regardless of which option ultimately prevails, there's so much real estate dedicated right now to the transition between the two-way street York as it transitions and feeds between York and Josephine. That's a tremendous amount of real estate right there. And some of these options may eliminate the need for that much roadway. In segment A, you did show sort of some conceptual ideas on how they get solved. Has been thought, or is that another study that's yet to come?
You have been one step ahead of us on each of our questions so far. So that is what we're going to talk about next, is those big transition zones, 40th Ave, and then that 17th and 18th transition zone as well, because that is definitely ID'd as a location of opportunity. A lot of real estate and not a lot of use aside from pavement for vehicles. There aren't even many sidewalks in that stretch. So there's a lot of real estate that we can use there.
I want to acknowledge a couple comments and a question that we're getting online. There's a comment from Jill and from Michael, kind of relatedly, that students are apparently driving the wrong way on York to get to the student parking lot. And then Michael says that parking consumes City Park, turning City Park into an East High School parking lot with all the dangers I've experienced of students racing around roundabouts and inside the park. Please consider your impact on City Park. And then you're welcome to respond to that. I'll throw in Jill's question is, on a different note, can we do something about the monstrosity that is the intersection of York, Josephine, and 18th? Yeah.
So I'll start with the first one with the wrong way driving. That again is benefit of having people that know the corridor. Two of our people on our project team live on the corridor and have already pointed that out. And I know it's just a sign, but to start putting in the do not enter wrong way signs all exist there as of this summer. That may not have changed the travel patterns, but it's the first step to trying to make that, trying to mitigate that issue, but it's definitely a known issue. Regarding the parking on City Park, that is kind of out of our wheelhouse. That is really Denver Parks that's taking care of that project. And then third question. Yes, monstrosity at 18th, York and Josephine. So again, that's going to be our talked about in the next couple of slides here of how these transition points will really work.
All right, respecting everyone's time, we have 10 minutes left of our meeting. So not necessarily we're going to fly through these, but we are going to, the next set of information is about improvements for all alternatives. So we have been talking really about the roadway, how people and vehicles, mainly vehicles and buses and freight, are moving to and through. We want to recognize a lot of the public input, a lot of the goals we can do within all alternatives. And we want to kind of start walking through these. So first is addressing barriers. That is, again, what we heard from previous planning studies that came in from public comment, as well as with this study. the connectivity between neighborhoods, particularly with the railroads. So we're back up in segment A. We're at that northern section on 40th. And then as well, a lot of people that don't live there don't recognize there's actually a second freight line on, I would say 42nd, the alignment of 42nd Avenue. So there's actually two barriers. There's two railroads. So we need to consider and recognize, let's see if we can remove those and or mitigate them. Can we look at grade separations for people walking, biking? And again, if we move forward with with the alternatives, there are opportunities to do these. When it comes to the extra land around York, Josephine, 18th, 17th, there's actually two triangular parcels missing sidewalks. Let's look and discover a roundabout. Can we do some type of consolidation? We have a lot of roadways, we have signals, already drivers, the lanes kind of go here and there. If you're not in the right one, you're going to miss a turn. Again, accident, speeding. Let's evaluate and see if we can do some type of traffic circle or roundabout. What Mike has mentioned throughout the corridor, again, a lot of the things that we were looking at were two-dimensional cross sections. When we say safety improvements and creating better connections, this is exactly what a lot of the questions and comments have come about. Every intersection, let's relook at the mid blocks, see if we can make them safer, and let's make them safer. Let's put in the pedestrian medians, refuge islands. Again, it supports safety for all users. And then as well as those bump outs, and we can also start looking at that landscaping, integrating the green infrastructure. Next slide. Becoming more environmentally resilient. This again has to happen along the entire corridor. There will be kind of to one of the goals that was mentioned early on is recognizing the existing conditions are not equitable. So in the north section, again, you have very stark conditions compared to the middle section. Let's ensure everything is equitable throughout the entire corridor and see if we can move forward too in integrating some green infrastructure. Transit improvements. I consider these bold moves. A lot of people will say these are low-hanging fruit. These are not. If we take time to invest in our bus stops so that and every one of the bus stops on this corridor, they have been identified for this improvement. Let's put in our shelters. Let's put in our benches. Let's do this. Possibly, maybe this could happen in the short term with funding and opportunities, but this is what's recommended for every bus stop along the corridor. As well, when it comes to, again, the corridor vision and how are we connecting our neighborhoods throughout this corridor, let's consider right now, Route 24, you get to 40th, it makes a right. It does not go north. Another bus route, Route 44, then actually comes down 40th and goes up. Let's actually see if we can flip those end of the lines. Let's see if we can making sure that the people from the north segment and as well as the south segment can access this corridor continuously. So these are options. And then again, the long-term 15-minute frequency. We can provide, if you keep going to the next slides, these maps just kind of highlight where these improvements are going. These will be put online so you can kind of spend a bit more detail. As well, one thing, if you go to the next slide, you'll start seeing too the traffic signal updates. This is recognizing Mike has used the term, there is span wire. So these are old. We need to upgrade these. We are hoping we can upgrade them kind of almost as an interim improvement so we can start receiving those benefits, again, of making sure safety is prioritized for all users. Next slide. So you again will see bus stop upgrades and the continued safety improvements along the corridor. These improvements, these can happen for all alternatives. So I know this is a lot of information and we hopefully it's understandable. Again, there's changes to the roadway itself from how it works and how it operates, but as well, there's complementary and very needed improvements that can happen for all of the alternatives.
All right, so just real quick before we wrap up here, I do want to point out we do have some other projects going on in this area as well. We mentioned a decent amount of times the Denver Moves Bikes update. This is the QR code to fill that out. This is citywide. we want to get your input on where we are missing bike connectivity, where bike connectivity exists, but maybe wasn't the right place in the long run, and where we can really improve this network. We're doing a full revamp of this over the next year. So please, if you have comments, especially if you chose alternative 3 for any of these as well, this is where you say, I would like to see that on York versus elsewhere. 2 others on that side real quick. So 17th and 18th transit priority design project. That is wrapping up and should be done at the end of the summer next year. And that's another one where we're just installing some quick win improvements along 18th and 17th to make sure that transit headways are on time. And then lastly, I know a lot of you have probably heard about this one. I know it's just a little tiny comment in the corner, but North Central Community Transportation Network, that is previously called GES, Community Transportation Network. That was put on pause due to some staffing issues at Dottie. It is coming back and going to be kicking off spring or summer of next year. So it's not gone. I know, I'm sure a lot of messaging went out about it this year, that it was going to happen end of this year. Just with some staffing issues, we're going to push that to spring, summer of next year, and more to come on that. So lastly, popping the surveys back up. Hopefully you all were following along, populating those surveys here in person and online. If not, it's all right here again. We'll circulate this as well through all the avenues that we've messaged you all previously. But with that, just wanted to say thank you. Actually, I always do this at the end of every meeting. Quick question. How did everyone hear about this meeting? Was it, if you raise your hand, if it was a flyer? Cool. Raise your hand if it was your RNO or council office. Okay. All right. Raise your hand if it was another means. I guess there's other people. So I'll chat with some people to see, because we always want to make sure we're messaging it people. Oh, yard signs. How about the yard signs? There we go. All right. Thank you. Just always looking for the best ways to get a hold of people that live in anywhere in Denver, but especially on this corridor as well, making sure we get as many people involved as possible. So thank you again. The project team will stick around here in person for those that are here and want to have a conversation. Here's my email. Feel free to email me directly. These slides will be circulated. If you're not on the email chain, please, or listserv, please put that in the chat, or if you're in person, put it on the sign up sheet. That is the best way to get these updates, aside from obviously living on the corridor and seeing yard signs. So thank you all, and we'll be in touch. Next time we'll see you at this level is in around March or April of next year. Sorry, February, March of next year, apologies. But then again, we will be in some of those community events that are happening in the neighborhood as well. So thanks all. For those that are still online, these slides will also be accessible on the website. On Dottie's website, there's a York Josephine specific site. Honestly, the easiest way to get there is searching on Google York Josephine Corridor Study Denver. And it's also linked in the survey. Thanks all.